We're using the McDonald cycle of learning to review our practice opportunities, and each of those activities that you have are falling into one of these 4 quadrants. And from there, we want to expand either on what's the prerequisite knowledge that teacher candidates would need for that opportunity, and then how would we extend that opportunity into other quadrants as we move forward. And we're hoping to use a cycle of learning as we look at the other HLPs, the high leverage practices, as we move forward, not just in explicit instruction, but other ones as we go.
You can click on this link. You'll find, in addition to the practice opportunity that I'm going to share, there are actually 4 other professional learning opportunity protocols that are listed there. And those learning protocols align with several other high leverage practices. So we had one for feedback, we had one for collaboration and co-teaching, and the one for explicit instruction. So if you're interested in this format, there are some there that you could use as a reference point. What I wanted to do was connect the learning opportunity that I'm going to share with McDonald's cycle of learning. I was spending some time thinking about which quadrant would be the most appropriate for this learning opportunity in its current format. And so when I looked at each of the components of the quadrant, the one that I thought most connected to this learning opportunity was quadrant 1, which is introducing and learning about the activity. And in this instance, the activity is really representing explicit instruction. The reason I felt like it was within quadrant 1 is because it allows the teacher educator to provide a representation to the candidate, opposed to the candidate considering themselves engaging in the practice initially. And when we put this together, one of the things we were thinking about was the way in which this video that Michael Kennedy produced could be a tool to use alongside of instruction around the elements of explicit instruction. We wanted to provide that example of this skill in a controlled setting so that the candidate could start developing this representation of practice and then construct their own image or vision of how that practice would look for themselves. And so that was really our thinking and the planning behind developing this protocol. Looking back at the McDonald article from which we used the graphic, they reference the work of Grossman, Hammerness, and all, and they talk about the common set of criteria that the core practices should feature. And a couple that I thought that this professional learning opportunity includes are that it supports the development of a practice that novices can enact in their classrooms across content areas. And what we know about explicit instruction is that it's a practice that can be utilized in any content area. Additionally, this learning opportunity supports a practice that results in preserving the integrity of an instructional practice. And as I thought about that, the word that kept coming to my mind in addition to integrity was fidelity. Oftentimes in many of our practices, but especially with explicit instruction, it's easy for some of the key components to be lost or glossed over. This semester I'm teaching a class where the students learn about teaching the basic components of reading using an explicit instruction framework, and they really underestimate the importance of the guided practice. And so in order for the impact and for the utility of explicit instruction to be seen with whatever the skill is, that guided practice is one that's important. And so using this learning opportunity allows us to specifically focus on each component of explicit instruction so that the students can understand the importance of the fidelity of using it. As I said before, the tool that I'm about to get to in just a second can be used across mediums. What I mean by that is when we developed the web series, we were really trying to be responsive to all the ways that practitioners and educator preparation providers in our state access candidates. So for us, that includes traditional prep programs, but also non-traditional programs that are offered by districts, that are offered by regional educational support agencies. And so we wanted to provide a tool that could have utility in a variety of contexts. This is a tool that can be used to anchor content or candidate teaching. So what I mean by that is the professional learning opportunity that I'm going to show you is one that can be used just in a content course because you could use the video, or you could tweak the tool so that it doesn't reference the timestamps in the video, but you could still use the questions, the probing questions, to help a candidate reflect on their own practice. This slide shows you the learning tool is in 3 pieces. The first part of it just provides a description and an overview of the opportunity for this professional learning practice. It provides a link to the explicit instruction video that is on the High Leverage Practices website. when you're thinking about using this in relation to content area, this tool starts out by asking the students to describe a time they've used explicit instruction or that they've watched someone else use it. It's directing them to really make a connection between the instruction that they may be getting in a content course and perhaps observation that they've done in a level 1 practicum or in a field experience that doesn't necessarily require them to be the person implementing the explicit instruction. And so the purpose of these questions is really to get them to make a connection between the practice that they've seen and the impact that that practice potentially had on the learning of the class. So those pre-video probing questions gets them prepared to make a connection from research to practice. The second part of the questions that are during the video probing questions direct the candidate to consider this statement, thinking about the value of purposeful sequencing that occurs when you're engaging in explicit instruction, and then the intensification of instruction. So this question can be posed directly to the content that's in this video, or it can also be posed for a student to use in reflecting on their own practice, whether it's thinking about a lesson plan or if they have actual video of themselves teaching at this point. Participants are specifically looking at timestamps in the video and observing what the teachers in the video are doing. If you wanted to use this without the video, you could continue to ask the questions about the 4 components of explicit instruction and remove the references to the video. So here, when I'm using this with my candidates, I'm using it in a methods class with the video on the High Leverage Practices site. So it's important for me that they are thinking about the example that's provided for them here. This can be modified so that they could use these questions to reflect on their own teaching. The other thing about this protocol and all of the protocols that came from that web series is that we really direct your attention to specific places in the video. The reason we do that is because we want the candidate to really focus on the specific behavior and not to watch it unguided and then not make the connection and how it's being implemented or modeled in the text. Think about how useful something like this might be for an instructor or for a leader of PD who might not necessarily feel as comfortable with the content, and this might also be a very scaffolded discussion for them as well. So in the final part of this, it continues through the video with the timestamps. Each of the timestamps intentionally draws the participant's attention to one of the key components of explicit instruction. And so that's very helpful. The last part of this is a reflection question, including the importance of data. So here's an opportunity for us to scaffold to a different high leverage practice or to help the students see the cycle of teaching, planning, instruction, assessment, and how to use those data to inform next step. This probing question leads the candidate or the participant towards those conclusions, and it gives them an opportunity to reflect on statements around the utility of this practice for a variety of students. So from start to finish, this protocol really requires creating an opportunity for students to consider ways that they've seen this modeled, to reflect on the components of explicit instruction in practice, and then to think about what next steps would be if they were going to use data to inform an instructional decision, and then to also reflect on the utility of the practice in a variety of settings. I feel like this practice could be evolved or could reflect different features of the learning cycle. What I did was I thought about what I would need to add to my practice or what we would need to do in class to advance this practice through the quadrants. If that was my intention, if that was my goal, is to make this practice one that could reflect each of those areas. So because I felt like this practice opportunity reflects the first quadrant, I think to make this appropriate for the second quadrant, what would be a great next step would be to have the students construct their own lesson plans using an explicit instruction template, and then creating and analyzing their own original lesson plan. This would allow them to generate their own thinking, insert their own content, so this makes it relevant for a variety of settings. They're still not ready to do it on their own, but they can make sure, almost like a checklist. Professional learning protocol might be a way for them to go back and say, do I have all these elements? Where are those obvious? And have I thought about data? That could be the one thing that could take this to the next part. Components that could move this to quadrant 2 2 would be having them actually implement the approved explicit instruction lesson with a small group of students or in our practicum seminar so that they could get an opportunity to practice it in a safe setting, then get feedback from their CT or from the supervisor based on the professional learning opportunity. And then the final way that this could be advanced to quadrant 4 is that the student could record themselves delivering the instruction of this approved lesson with a small group of students and then take the protocol themselves and analyze their own teaching, asking themselves those questions. So they can ask themselves, what were ways that I used a logical sequence within this lesson? What were ways that I provided a clear model and explanations of this content to the students? What were examples of this? What were ways that I provided multiple opportunities for the student to respond and provided appropriate feedback to them? So this could be something that they do privately, or it could be something that they do in a small group, in seminar, or in professional learning communities if they're in-service teachers, or if they're part of a professional learning community. As a pre-service teacher, they could still have a framework by which they can reflect on their own practice. The reflection is the part where the struggle happens for most of the candidates. This protocol really gives them a way to reflect either publicly or privately on material that's their own material or material that they're observing either by their co-teacher or for another video.